The rapidly evolving global landscape has drawn significant attention to the Russia-Ukraine conflict and its possible resolution. Key questions include whether the war will end soon, how the Chinese Communist Party, a major behind-the-scenes player, will respond, and what the long-term implications will be for Europe and Russia. Additionally, there is growing attention on whether U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts to align with Russia against China will succeed and how these developments will impact Taiwan. Today, we will analyze these dynamics. On February 22nd, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt stated that U.S. President Donald Trump, along with his Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg, the Treasury Secretary, and the Secretary of State, are actively engaged in negotiations with both sides of the conflict. She expressed optimism that the war could end soon. On February 24th, Leavitt reiterated, "The President, his team are very much focused on continuing negotiations with both sides of this war to end the conflict, and the President is very confident we can get it done this week." The date she is referring to is March 1st. Leavitt further stated that President Trump sees a minerals agreement with Ukraine as critical, as it would help recover U.S. taxpayer funds. On February 23rd, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky reaffirmed his willingness to reach a mineral agreement with Washington, allowing the U.S. to access Ukraine's natural resources in exchange for continued support. Upon taking office, President Trump immediately reversed many policies and executive orders from the prior administration, sparking significant global changes. His decisive action shifted the 3-year Russia-Ukraine war from a stalemate to ceasefire negotiations. Though expected, this move elicited strong, diverse reactions from stakeholders. In China, state-backed media reflected unease. On February 18, the CCP-affiliated 163 news sites released an article titled, "Trump Buys Russia, U.S. Defense Secretary Targets China, Putin Issues Key Signals." The article noted, with apparent dissatisfaction, that Russian presidential spokesperson Peskov emphasized that given the lack of high-level U.S.-Russia engagement in recent years, the significance of this presidential call cannot be overstated. It continued, "According to official disclosures from both sides, the U.S. and Russian presidents spoke for 90 minutes, and the conversation appeared to be positive." The report went on to assert, China-Russia relations are at an unprecedented high, so there is no need for concern. However, if the war ends and Ukraine regains stability while securing a rare earth agreement with the U.S., reducing its reliance on China, then Washington will become even more aggressive in encircling China, leaving us with no choice but to prepare accordingly. The article acknowledged that since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, China and Russia have rapidly strengthened ties, seemingly forming an unbreakable alliance. However, it admitted that this strengthened relationship is contingent on the adversarial dynamic between Russia and the U.S. A separate February 16th article suggested that CCP leadership remains largely uninformed about U.S.-Russia interactions and expressed signs of frustration. The article highlighted, the current reality is that while it's known that Trump and Putin have been in contact, details such as timing, channels used, frequency, and discussion points remain undisclosed. It also stressed any negotiations concerning Ukraine and Europe's security must involve European participation. The report further asserted, without Ukraine and the European Union, there can be no credible, successful negotiations, nor a lasting peace. It is evident that the CCP is reluctant to see a swift U.S.-Russia ceasefire agreement and instead hopes that influential European nations, heavily infiltrated by China, will delay or even derail peace efforts. This hypothesis was soon reinforced. On February 24th, the same 163 websites published another article. With a gloating tone, the article cited Chinese state media reports stating, "As the Russia-Ukraine conflict nears its 3-year mark, the EU's 27 member states have reached an agreement on the 16th round of sanctions against Russia." In order that these sanctions directly target the backbone of the Russian economy, including an aluminum ban impacting Russia's non-ferrous metals industry, which accounts for 12% of its export revenue. Additionally, the blacklisting of shadow tankers is aimed at severing Moscow's $30 billion annual energy trade. The article underscores the legitimacy and necessity of European sanctions, seemingly ignoring China's earlier pledge of an unlimited partnership with Russia. Instead, it expresses frustration over Putin's apparent pivot towards Trump. However, a contradiction emerges. If Europe possessed such effective tools to curb Russia, why wait until Russia seeks peace after 3 years of war to use them? This suggests motives beyond simply strengthening Europe's stance in ceasefire talks. Turning to Europe, some worry that as US-Russia negotiations sideline Europe and Ukraine, China might pull Europe away from the US. The troubling answer is that Europe has long been adrift. In the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Europe's actions have matched China's hopes, providing Ukraine with more symbolic than tangible aid, while condemning Russia yet continuing to buy its energy in large quantities. While the CCP has been the true manipulator behind the war and its primary beneficiary, Europe has largely turned a blind eye to this reality, unwilling to abandon its shrinking economic ties with China. Over the past 4 years, Europe's actions have primarily drained the resources of the US, Russia, Ukraine, and even itself. More critically, this process has driven Russia into a strategic alliance with China, North Korea, and Iran, an axis of authoritarian regimes. The underlying causes of the situation stem from two key factors. Europe's deep mistrust of Russia stems from historical tensions in geopolitics, amplified by Soviet aggression during the Cold War, especially in Eastern Europe. This left Europe dependent on US protection. After the Cold War, Russia aimed to join Europe and shed its communist image, but Europe's wariness persisted, keeping Russia at arm's length. Rebuffed by the West and reeling from economic woes, Russia turned to its vast resources, reviving its economy through energy exports. Rejected, it reclaimed imperial ambitions, again clashing with the West. This shift led Russians to favor authoritarian rule over democracy, solidifying Putin's grip as their long-term leader. Meanwhile, as China's economy boomed, Europe chased profits there, overlooking how this eroded their own manufacturing and deepened dependence on Chinese markets and supply chains. More critically, Europe failed to recognize that the CCP's ambitions far surpassed those of post-Cold War Russia. While Russia sought recognition as a great power through assertive tactics, the CCP's ultimate objective has been to dismantle the existing world order, challenge the United States, and establish global dominance. The tensions between Europe and Russia stem from historical and post-war dynamics. Recognizing the primary global threat is key to resolution, allowing shared values to foster stability and cooperation. A key question now is whether Trump's strategy of aligning with Russia to counter the CCP can succeed. Examining recent actions by the Trump administration provides insight into this evolving geopolitical dynamic. On February 23rd, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, stated on CNN that Russia should not be solely held responsible for the Ukraine war. He asserted, "This war did not have to happen. It was provoked. However, that does not mean Russia was the one who initiated it." Witkoff pointed to Ukraine's bid to join NATO as a major trigger for the conflict. He said, "There was extensive debate over Ukraine's NATO membership at the time, but it was entirely necessary. From Russia's perspective, this posed a direct threat, and we must acknowledge that reality." Meanwhile, on February 22nd, entrepreneur Elon Musk responded on X to a user's remarks regarding the Ukraine president. The user claimed that Zelensky had initially agreed to a U.S. proposed mineral trade deal, then publicly rejected and mocked the agreement, only to later change his stance again. The user further noted that Zelensky had rejected the deal for a second time that day and questioned how he will survive as president. Musk replied, "Zelensky has been fired from his acting job." Previously, Musk had suggested that Zelensky must hold elections to validate his leadership and prove he represents the Ukraine people's will. Otherwise, he would be acting as a dictator. Musk also stated that many Ukrainians despise Zelensky. On February 21st, former Ukrainian presidential advisor Oleksiy Arestovich made remarks on Telegram suggesting that if he were elected president, he would imprison Zelensky for life to ensure that future generations remember the sacrifices made under his leadership. Arestovich wrote, "I was often asked, will I arrest Zelensky if I become president? Of course not. How can I? He will be arrested by the court. I will give the order to detain him, and no foreign country will save him and his cronies. We will catch them all, wherever they are hiding, get them out of the ground, bring them here and read out the verdict live. He will be imprisoned, I think, for a life, and people will remember how he put them in dozens of thousands just to keep his beloved government in power, the power to kill and rob." Arestovich further states that he will make the state work for the people. He emphasized that he is prepared to use force if necessary. Following this, he posted another statement, saying that if Zelensky were genuinely resisting the US, Russia, and the CCP on behalf of Ukraine and its people, he would stand by his side and rally others to fight alongside him, even against the entire world. But he believes what Zelensky is defending is not the country, it is his own power, a power built on oppression, censorship, and violence. Arestovich said, "That is a betrayal of the nation and its citizens. There's only one possible outcome for that." Arestovich pushes for pragmatism, urging negotiations to end the war quickly. He warns that Ukraine's prolonged fight is too costly and risks exhausting its manpower. He has often criticized Zelensky's goal of reclaiming all territories, calling it unrealistic, especially after 2024's battlefield losses. He accused the government of dragging on a hopeless war for elite gain. Zelensky, however, insists on military resistance, rejecting talks until Russia fully withdraws, widening their strategic rift. Arestovich also dislikes Zelensky's de-Russification policies, saying they alienate Russian speakers and divide the nation. He noted the hypocrisy of Zelensky's team using Russian privately while enforcing Ukrainian publicly. Zelensky sees Russia as the ultimate enemy, pursuing a unified language and culture with no room for pro-Russian compromise. Currently, Arestovich is active in the United States, attending forums and preparing to launch a presidential campaign from abroad. The U.S.'s strategy of engagement with Russia appears to have had a significant impact, as evidenced by Moscow's recent cooling of relations with Beijing and even its public expressions of dissatisfaction towards the Chinese Communist Party. On February 13th, U.S. President Donald Trump reiterated his support for Russia's re-entry into the G7, which would restore the alliance to its previous G8 configuration. Before last year's U.S. elections, Trump discussed his reasoning for re-engaging with Russia in an interview with political commentator Tucker Carlson. He described the China-Russia alliance as dangerous and recalled a lesson from his university history professor. "You never want Russia and China uniting," Trump emphasized. "I believe that it's potentially a great danger." He further stated that if re-elected, he would work to break up the Russia-China partnership, expressing confidence in his ability to achieve this goal. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance told Putin that Russia's isolation from Western markets has made it a junior partner to China, a role that doesn't serve Putin's interests. Some argue the U.S. hasn't abandoned Europe or Ukraine in peace talks. Rather, both have lost their wartime leverage and now hinder negotiations in ways that benefit the CCP. Trump's moves aim to shield them, though not the politicians profiting from the conflict. Turning to Taiwan, many analysts and political figures in the region have drawn parallels between Ukraine's fate in the Russia-Ukraine war and Taiwan's potential future, suggesting that Ukraine's current struggles foreshadow Taiwan's own challenges. These observers argue that Russia's invasion of Ukraine serves as a preview of a potential Chinese assault on Taiwan, which is why they have offered unwavering support to Ukraine. However, as global dynamics shift rapidly, perspectives in Taiwan are also evolving. On February 20th, technology expert Mei Hua took to Facebook to reflect on the early days of the war. She noted that before Russia's invasion on February 24, 2022, the U.S. had repeatedly warned Ukraine of the impending attack, Yet Ukrainian leaders dismissed the threat and failed to prepare for war. Zelensky, at the time, was an advocate for peace and sought diplomatic talks with Russia. Su believes that this miscalculation led Putin to assume Zelensky would flee immediately and that Russia could seize Ukraine within 3 days, prompting the full-scale invasion. In a 2023 post, Su wrote that if Putin had foreseen Zelensky's resistance, sanctions, and shortages, costing Russia dearly, he might not have attacked. She credits Zelensky for Ukraine's endurance, but suggests he regrets his early pacifism, which emboldened Putin. Zelensky is now atoning for his naivety, she concluded. Su Meihua pointed out that Taiwan is far luckier than Ukraine. We have a vital strategic resource, semiconductors, in the Taiwan Strait as a natural defense, she said. Still, she stressed that Taiwan must learn from Ukraine by strengthening its military and coastal defenses. This would show enemies that invading Taiwan carries a heavy cost, deterring rash moves. She added, pushing for peace talks with an enemy set on annexation shows weakness. Only by preparing for war can we secure peace. Taiwan must arm itself like a porcupine to keep aggressors at bay. Su's analysis is clear and rational, but she might have missed one point: the CCP's hidden role in the Russia-Ukraine war and the Middle East conflicts, including its backing of Hamas. The CCP has fueled these wars, using economic support, military aid, and influence in the US and Europe to weaken America. Taiwan and Ukraine differ fundamentally. If China attacked Taiwan, it would lack the strategic buffers Russia used in Ukraine or the distractions of Middle East conflicts. Exposed globally, the CCP now faces not just Taiwan, but a Trump-led US that sees it as a top threat. If the Russia-Ukraine war ends quickly and the US and Russia align, the CCP could face a fatal crisis.